to Rome, where 133 Roman Catholic cardinals from around the world have gathered in the Vatican to begin the secretive process of selecting a new pope. They've attended Mass in St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. In the afternoon, they formed a procession to the Sistine Chapel, where they've begun the process of voting for a candidate to replace Pope Francis, who died last month. They've been urged to choose someone capable of protecting church unity at a difficult turning point in history. The conclave will end when a candidate secures a 2/3 majority. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now live from the Vatican, actually in London rather, by Arise correspondent Judita da Silva. I was rather hoping that you were milling around the conclave members there, but I know you've been keeping a tab on what's been going on, so thank you very much indeed for joining us, Judita. Good to see you again. I'm just looking at the pictures of St. Peter's Basilica and the cardinals with their red caps and cloaks. Just underline for us how important a moment this is.
I mean, this is a very pivotal moment on several fronts. When you think about the history of Catholicism and the institution of the Catholic Church, it is the longest existing institution in history, which shows its significance. And particularly at this time of transition, it's a unique one because people saw Pope Francis as somewhat a revolutionary. He was more liberal, he was more progressive. And of the 133 cardinals who are eligible to vote and are in that conclave, 108 of them were ordained by Pope Francis. And what he did is that he looked to the south and he incorporated from countries like far off countries that had never been incorporated before, and like Iran, for instance, and Mongolia. And also what he did was that he introduced more Asians and ethnic minorities and people who had a different ideology to him. It was in a sense a lot more democratic, the coalition of cardinals around the world, moving the church to less dogma and less institutionalism and more of reform. But now at this transition, everyone's looking to see, will the cardinals be driven by faith to select someone who will carry on the light of Francis, or go to someone who might take it in a more traditional route back to how the church used to be?
And that's a very important point that you raised there, Judita, because I understand there are three broad groups among the cardinals. You've got the conservatives, the progressives, and the moderates. One imagines that given the groupings of cardinals who will have their favorite candidates, I mean, there'll be machinations going on. One is kind of reminded of the movie The Conclave.
Absolutely. And the thing is, what's interesting about it is that even though it's said to be driven by faith and belief, it is actually somewhat political. It always has been. Going back to the times of the old kings of the colonial West, there's been this idea of a division between church and state, but it's never actually been true in practice. Because when you think about it, the body that forms the electorate that chooses our world leaders is also the body that forms the congregation in our churches. So there has to be a synergy between church and state. And what you find is that when you look at the front runners, like people like Pier Battista Pizzaballa, who's seen as he's the Latin patriarch for Jerusalem, he's been involved in speaking vocally about the issues between Israel and Palestine and the situation in Gaza. He offered himself up in exchange for child hostages. When you look at someone like Peter Erdo, he's a representative in Hungary. We know that Viktor Orban of Hungary is extremely far right, and they seem to be sympathetic, or at least to be congenial. That worries people because he is very popular with the conservatives. When you look at moderates like other contestants, you get to see that there is always a contention between what do we do for the church, and this goes to the politics of things. When you look at the geopolitical landscape today, whether it's Marine Le Pen with the National Rally, whether it is Giorgia Meloni with the Fratelli d'Italia, whether it's Viktor Orban with Fidesz, whether it's the AfD with Vidal, there is a move towards extreme right sentiment, which is fueled by a hatred towards migration. Pope Francis was pro-migration, he was pro-immigrants, he was pro-refugees. People are worried that there is going to be a standoff between religions like Islam and Catholicism, which is the final frontier for Christianity. And if they're not seen to be staunch in protecting the tenets that hold the boundaries that define the faith that is Catholicism, the church might fall. They have to contend with issues of the historical sex crimes and pedophilia, issues with mismanagement of funds, issues with the incorporation of women who are 50% of the human population and 50% of the congregation of the Catholic faith. Who will be the leader to consolidate all those sentiments and drive the church forward in a way that they don't keep losing people in the pews in the churches, and now incorporate a world that is changing in its sentiment towards religion, and they want less dogma and more understanding that the way people feel is one that is more accommodating of different ideologies.
Indeed, and there seem to be quite a few people, talking about race and ethnicity, who would like to see an Italian pope, because there hasn't been one for some time, whereas there are also some who don't want to see another sort of European pontiff and are hoping for an African or an Asian pope. Would that be a surprising choice?
It would be a surprising choice, but there is a good chance because one of the frontrunners is Cardinal Antonio Tagle from the Philippines. When you look at the position he has, he was ordained back in 2012. He's held a lot of senior positions, because I say that in comparison to someone like our Nigerian cardinal, who is Okpaleke. The reason why they say he doesn't look like he could be a frontrunner is that he doesn't have enough global exposure. He's very local in the movement he has and the influence he has within Nigeria and Africa. They need someone who can consolidate the global population of the Catholic Church. Someone like Antonio Tagle in the Philippines as a country has an 80% population of identifying Catholics out of their 100 million people. That is the biggest localized population of Catholics in any country in the world. They're also seen as a bridge towards China because of Asia. He could be very influential, and people think that he probably could be Pope because he's nicknamed the Asian Francis. Should you have someone like him sitting as pontiff, he brings in that look of ethnic minorities to show that the leader of the Catholic Church will not always be a white man, but he is the kind of man in the position in the geopolitical landscape where he can exert influence on a side of the country that seems to be the future superpower, which is China, but also has a fealty to the kind of pontiff that Pope Francis was. So the progression will continue, the liberalism will continue, but the identity of the church will be more inclusive.
Thank you very much indeed. Judita da Silva is our ICE correspondent. She was talking to me on the line there from London.